The reason why I'm taking a moment to reflect on the conversation that I had is because as I was doing the survey, I noticed that on her wall, she has a photo. It says Thinkers on it, has a picture of Obama, Bob Marley, Malcolm X, Martin Luther King, Nelson Mandela. I'm like, okay. So I asked her, I was like, well, what do you think about people back then, specifically, or rather, people who, what do you think about culture here in the United States in the 60s versus now? And her response was, well, people actually speak up. And I found that interesting because my perspective is a little bit different. So anyway, so she continued and she spoke about how, yeah, she saw, or, she's witnessed people being hung and stuff like that. This is a woman who's about 75 years old. So she's experienced a lot of adversity in a very different way than we have. And she also mentioned how, back when she was younger, she would have to say sir to, a little white kid, basically. And so to be put in those positions, it wasn't for her. So at 13, she basically signed off to be married. She was like, she asked her family if she could please be married as a way to escape and move to New York. She was in North Carolina and just couldn't stomach being there anymore. So that was her escape. Her parents said, hey, okay. And she's been here since. Going back to her response and what the difference was, she gave me some examples on how she's like, yeah, now people speak up when they see something wrong, whereas back then they would stay quiet, So in addition to that whole, example I gave you about her having to say sir to this little kid or little kids, apart from the derogatory term, she also mentioned like, yeah, she's a white man would go into a black man's house, rape his wife, and the black man would, the husband rather, would stay quiet if he wanted to live. And so a lot of that was going on back then. A lot of the oppression that we hear about, we hear about it, but a lot of the stuff that we don't hear about, it's stuff like that. A lot of that stuff was going on a regular. And this is the thing, I think a lot of that stuff is still going on. Maybe not in the same way, or maybe not as much in this country, but it's going on in other places too. Maybe the context is a little bit different, but essentially, this stuff is still happening, I would say, and I'm speculating, I'm not going through any empirical data or anything. But essentially, the reason why I think this is important to talk about is for the sake of context. It made me think about how important it is not just to convey concepts. I'm big on conveying concepts as opposed to over-articulating and like these long-winded curriculums, and it's just like, gets right to the point, it's just like on-the-job training, like that should be a focal point as opposed to, this whole debt for education system that we have going on now, where people are literally, going through all types of panic attacks, anxiety, depression, suicide because they can't pay a college bill for a mediocre job when they can get, for most jobs, you can just train somebody for a few weeks, skip all that school shit and like get to work, people contribute more to society that way. And so, yeah, so going back to what I was mentioning, concepts, I think, are important. Conceptualizing things, codifying things or modeling, however you want to call it. But also perspective, it's just kind of like really evaluate what you have going on and context. I think it's important as well. A lot of times, well, even for myself, like for me, I think a lot of us we're very entitled, borderline spoiled with a lot of things, taking a lot of things for granted. Right, give me a moment. Thank you. Meanwhile, we have folks like this person I just spoke to feel like, yeah, like back in the day, people would just keep everything quiet, and this generation is more vocal. I'm like, that's very cool. Um, so I didn't ask explicitly, but based on her response, it sounds like she has a more optimistic perspective for society right now. So I thought that was interesting. A lot of times I catch myself, I'm like, I'm not so optimistic about people overall in that regard. But then again, at the same time, if I wasn't, then I probably wouldn't be involved in community work or anything like that. I wouldn't necessarily, as they say, believe in social change. I think it can happen, but anyway, I thought it was important to reflect on that, document this, and share with you the importance of context, concepts, perspective, and history, and getting someone else's perspective on those things, whether explicitly or implicitly. All right, y'all, that's it for today. Roberto Enamorado, aka Roberto in Love. Peace.